All right, I'm going to start this off by just saying I feel pretty confident that this is probably the most valuable video you probably will have ever watched in regards to game development and specifically virality. Virality probably just about in any regard, but especially obviously in regards to video games. Today we're going to be talking about a retention study of 100 gameplay videos that I did, logged over 400 data points, and that allowed me to identify like 24 specific gameplay features that have very predictable effects on viewer retention. As kind of a quick intro here, so after I released Choo Choo Charles, I realized, there's gotta be a handful of game mechanics that have some kind of specific effects on retention, because I'd been doing YouTube, I'd been doing devlogs and stuff, and I was aware that, like, okay, there are certain things that you say and it will increase your retention. There are certain things you say and it decreases your retention. There are certain things that you can do that'll cause people to re-watch parts of the video and increase retention that way. And so I was like, within the context of actual gameplay, there's probably a lot of things that do have significant impacts on retention and thus also on virality, right? Because the higher the retention, the more views a video gets. That's how YouTube works. So the no commentary gameplay channel Alpha Beta Gamer was willing to give me access to their back-end channel stats. And so if you're not familiar, they do a lot of... it's a large channel. It's one of the largest like indie no commentary channels. A lot of it is horror stuff, but they've got a bunch of other random things as well. And in the retention study, I tried to grab as many games as I could that were coming from just in different genres, all kinds of random stuff to get a wide-ish data set, as wide as I could. That is what we're going to be talking about. So as a couple of kind of prerequisites, a little bit of homework, because here's the deal. This is going to be a big video. This is a long video. I'm probably going to have to film it in a couple of sittings. But also, if you want to have a decent chance of kind of following along, you should, ideally, you should just watch all the other videos on this channel, especially the stuff in the Everything in Order playlist, but especially the videos on instinct, video on what triggers a game to go viral, and the video on what entertainment is. Those three specific videos will give you a decent foundation, but again, ideally, you'd watch all the other stuff. And I should also mention, this is, if you really want to apply this stuff, you're probably going to have to watch through this a handful of times. Hey, that's me increasing retention. Yeah. But I am serious. Here's the deal. Like, all the stuff on this channel, I don't want people to think that they can just, like, watch one of these videos and then just be like, oh, I watched all the videos, but my games still suck. It's like, yeah, you got to, like, actually understand what I'm talking about here. So, just watching through this is not going to make you have a game with 20 billion views. Okay, that's not really how it works. You have to actually understand what I'm talking about here. So again, going through those prerequisite videos will help. That'll get you a solid foundation. And yeah, so all right, next thing. So basically, here's the deal. If you want to make a game that has that reaches a mass audience, right, you need to go viral. Okay, it is possible to make, obviously a very profitable game off of, let's say, word of mouth or off of the Steam algorithm and some things like that. Yes, you can do that, but if you can go viral and get 20 billion views, you might as well, right? So, virality in social media, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, all this stuff, it's the easiest way to get in front of a global audience. And then from there, it's like once you've got like kind of like the mass like number of people, then they can take it on a word of mouth basis and kind of get into those like IRL corners of the world that you would have a more difficult time reaching, right? There's a lot of people that don't watch YouTube. There's tons of people who don't watch YouTubers. They hate it. They find it annoying. They find it obnoxious. But their friend who watches YouTube might find out about a cool game, and then they tell their friends that don't watch YouTube, right? So ideally, you need both word of mouth and mass virality, ideally. So that's why this is useful. So basically, as kind of a quick summary of some of those prerequisite videos, if a game is being played by YouTubers and that game is not getting as many views as they would normally get, people aren't really going to continue playing it, and it's not going to catch fire. If people are playing it and that video is performing above average, you know, let's say they're getting twice as many views as they normally would on their channel, they're going to say, oh, wow, I should keep making content about this. Maybe their friends will start making content about it. More people will start making content about it. Here's the deal. When YouTubers get views, they get money. So it's like, if your game is a gold mine, people are going to mine it, right? You don't have to ask them to. You don't have to beg people to. You don't have to pay them to. You're paying them indirectly by giving them a game that will earn them more money. Large YouTubers, they're good at editing. They've got engaging personalities. They know how to kind of get the most out of a game and make it appeal to their audience, but only to an extent, right? Most YouTubers are not skilled enough to take a lot of the crappy games that get released on Steam. They're not going to make a viral video out of that. They're not going to make money off of it, okay? So ideally, your game would be helping content creators make better content, right? You're not going to be getting in the way with weird stuff, with weird mechanics, with mechanics that are hurting their retention. And ideally, you will give them a tool to create good content. And if you do that successfully, then you can kind of spawn this tidal wave of content. Kind of like I mentioned, one of the key ways that you would have control over this is through retention. Most social media sites, most of the video ones, specifically I'd say like YouTube and TikTok, but other platforms as well, they promote content that has really, really high retention rates. This is basically just how much percentage or how much time, or both really combined, they're taking both into account. How much time are people spending watching a specific piece of content? If people are watching it for 10 seconds, that content's probably not going very far. If they're watching it for 20 minutes, well, now you're going to get 50 million views, or you know, whatever it might be. Retention rate is very, very important, and we have a lot of control over that as game developer. Firstly, I'm going to give you kind of just the overall basis of how retention works. Again, this is kind of gone into on other videos, but basically the way that you keep somebody engaged is by working towards a goal, right? You have a goal, you have a conflict, you have a problem, you have a puzzle, and you are actively working towards solving it, and you're demonstrating progress towards that goal throughout the video. And what that is essentially doing is that people are they're sort of living vicariously through you, and they get to feel as though they are solving a problem, as though they are accomplishing a goal. So you're kind of taking people on a journey through accomplishment, right? You're giving them a sense of accomplishment. The way that this works in practice, I'll give my my devlog template, for example. So basically, in like the first 5 seconds of a video, I try to explain the overall conflict, the overall story of the video. It's like, okay, what goal am I trying to accomplish? So it might be, there's no enemies in the game, and that's awful because I need enemies in a game. Okay, and then next I'm giving a little bit of context, like for the next maybe like 10 or 15 seconds. Some additional context so that people understand, again, they understand the full scope of like, what is the goal? What are we accomplishing? And then in the next like 45 seconds, 60 seconds, I try and make rapid progress towards that goal, right? It's like, okay, look, we're doing stuff. We're getting stuff done. We want to show immediately that we're doing something. That immediately gives people this feeling that we are working towards this goal. And then this is something that I don't know exactly how you would incorporate this into games, but just, again, from like an overall retention standpoint, then I'll like throw in a twist or like some kind of additional challenge, sort of something that makes it a little bit more multi-dimensional. Like, for example, if I'm working on enemy AI, maybe 60 seconds in, I reveal that there's some other entire really difficult feature for the AI that I need to add that I've never done before, and I don't know how to do it. Something like that, right? So, and then the rest of the video, what you're doing is you are showing progress towards the goal. You are interrupting that progress with additional, like, kind of like intermediate conflicts. And actually, I've got a graph for this. I'll just pull this up on screen. This is the graph here. This is basically what it looks like. This is how I outline it. Obviously, here's the deal. I'm not Mr. Beast. If you were to ask him, I'm sure he'd give you a much better explanation. But ultimately, you've got your main timeline of your video, where you've got your overarching goal. and some intermediate goals. And then you also you have constant reminders of how close you are, right? It's like, oh, we're about halfway there. You know, it's like, think about when you're on a car ride and you're like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? How close are we? Right? We want to know where we are on this spectrum. You can think of it like almost like a progress bar. This is why progress bars are on everything, loading screens and all that stuff, right? Because we want to see how close are we. So that's kind of a basic look at retention. Essentially, it's like if people lose interest in something when they can't see the direction that they are heading, or they can't see progress towards that direction. An unengaging video is going to be one that feels kind of aimless. It lacks direction. It lacks progress. If you're just accomplishing a task and then accomplishing a task and then accomplishing a task towards no really identifiable end, it's going to be unengaging. It's like in a scenario like that, you might as well just be listing off a random array of numbers. Just like 1, 8, 45, 109, 8,504. Like, you're just doing stuff and it's not going anywhere. That is kind of the basis of what all of retention is kind of being built on. And I think you'll kind of see as we get into all these specific features, you'll start to see kind of how that lines up. First thing that we're going to hop into are features that harm retention. So the first feature that's going to harm your retention, and actually I should also mention real quick, so keep in mind this study was done on no commentary gameplay videos, okay? Usually, I mean, here's the deal. Most people are going to be watching content about your game in the context of commentated and edited gameplay videos, okay? There's a person up in the corner with a face cam, and there's goofy edits, and there's subtitles and all that stuff. So naturally, retention is going to be better, and some of these things might become less of an issue. So that's just something to keep in mind. So the main menu, this is one of these things that on a commentated video, this probably won't be as big of a retention sink. But essentially, you can lose 30 to 50% of your viewers on a bad menu screen. Now, here's the deal. Obviously, I'll kind of show you. I should pull up a chart so I can kind of draw what some of these things would look like. In the beginning of a video, naturally you're going to see your menu screen, but also retention naturally dips a lot by potentially 30 to 50% at the beginning of any video. On my devlogs, the retention dips a ton right in the beginning. So that's it. This is, again, this first point doesn't mean the most and isn't insanely valuable, but I have seen examples where retention is not nearly as affected by the menu screen, on menu screens that were more interesting and more interactive. What retention is usually going to look like on a YouTube video is it's going to look like this. It's going to go down, and then it kind of levels off a bit, and then it kind of goes along, and then you get to the end, right? So during your menu screen, you're going to see this, right? You're seeing massive retention drop off. In a lot of examples, the retention drop ceases basically as soon as the game starts. As soon as the player takes control of the character, that's when the retention stops dropping quite so dramatically. This was an insanely consistent dip that was logged. This is an example here where at point G, right here, the player was sitting on the main menu, but then they started moving their mouse towards the play button. And so they were just sitting on the menu, and then they start moving slowly towards the play button, and then retention starts to hold. Main menu. Ultimately, retention will consistently drop until the gameplay actually starts, so any time spent on your main menu will cost you. Especially in a no commentary setting, but less in others. You can easily lose 30 to 50% of your viewers to a bad menu on no commentary. Again, I made a note on this. To mitigate this, you'd either need to have a really interesting animated or interactive main menu or make it so that the player controls the character to navigate the menu. Now that one, I'm not sure if that's really a good way to do it, because you need to teach people what the game is. It means you would have to like start the game like in a tutorial or something. It just seems a little bit messy, but I think having a nice animated or interactive menu would help. So next thing are player deaths. Essentially, every single time that the player in your game dies, you will lose retention, because you were working towards, you were making progress, you were going, and then all of a sudden it's cut short. And now it's like that tension is all released, and people are like, oh, dang it. And now they feel defeated, and they're more likely to leave the video. Generally, what I see with player deaths is around 6 to 15% dips. But there is a little bit more to get into here. So oftentimes, player deaths are especially hurting retention because they're followed by very long game over screens. And here I specifically noted, sometimes you've got a game over screen that's 20 to 60 seconds. You've got your game over screen, and then it's followed by a loading screen, and then it's followed by 20 seconds of retreading ground to get back to where you previously were, or sometimes even longer. And of course, they also cause this jarring break in flow and progress. To fix this, I think it would be best to try to find ways to make player deaths as infrequent as possible, and make respawns as close to instant as possible. Try and cut out as many menus or long animations or long loading screens, and respawn players in such a way that they're exactly where they left off, or don't need to backtrack over things that they've already done. I think I also made some other specific points on backtracking and how bad that is for retention. Deaths, it can also be less literal. There were some examples of, for example, kart racing games where you'd be racing the cart, and then you'd like go off the track into like the water, and it'd have to play a respawn animation, and you see a dip of like 5%. So let's see if we can find a couple examples of some of these. All right, so this one is an example of a 13% dip. This is point B right here. Let me scroll down right here. Might be difficult to see. Big dip, and this is on a death during a horror game. So player just died, and now this long death screen is popping up, and people are leaving the video. And then I think it probably levels off again, probably around the point where that death screen ends. But yeah, so that's an example of that one. Let's find a couple other ones here. Okay, here's an example of like a sort of a kart racing one. This is a 6% dip on point B right here. So we're going along, kind of a steady decline. And then there's a sharp dip right at this point here, right? We fall off the edge. And this is even a really quick, this was a quick respawn. This was a really quick respawn. But even then, you've got 6% of people leaving, or 6% of people who were originally watching. It's actually more than 6% of the people who were watching at that point in the video, because retention is already down to about 33%. So it's actually closer to, what would that be, like a 15% dip? Is that right? I don't know if my math is mathing, but it would be something like that. So those are some good examples of kind of what that looks like. So next one. Oh, actually, also, another quick note. Jump scare deaths. Jump scare deaths in horror games are a little bit different. But jump scares is a specific point later on that we'll get into. So next one, level and match completion. So level-based games are something that you have to be a little bit careful about, because each individual level inherently, it's like it acts as its own goal, right? So you start a level, you have a goal, you complete it, and now people feel a sense of completion, and they're more inclined to leave the video and not stick around for the future levels. Let's say you've got a video where you're doing 3 rounds of a game or 3 levels. Let's say you're doing 3 rounds of Fortnite. Every time that a round of Fortnite ends, there's probably going to be a slight dip. Every time a round of Among Us ends in a video, there's going to be a slight dip, because people want to stick around until they see the current goal that they're fixated on. They want to see it completed. So level completions usually cause 3 to 10% dips. They're pretty much the most common and consistent type of dip logged during this study. The factors that contribute to the severity of the dips are the length of the level transition and how heavy the sense of completion is. There are some games where it's like shorter levels and there isn't like a super clear goal that's being defined. So the dips are thus less, maybe closer to like that 3%. But if it's like slightly longer matches, let's say maybe 10 minutes, and the ending has been really hyped up, as soon as that ends, so something like Among Us and Fortnite, I think would be good examples of ones that would have these larger dips. But also the win screens, in like puzzle games, if you've got, you finish the level and then you've got 10 seconds of loading screen and menus and stuff, that's not good for retention. Obviously, again, in commentated videos, things like this will probably be cut out. But if somebody's, let's say, live streaming, that's the other thing that you got to keep in mind is a live stream is going to probably line up more closely with a lot of this data than most commentated videos. Because, again, in a live stream, you can't cut out the loading screen. You just got to sit through it. I think the best scenario, and this is kind of, again, this is one of these points of nuance. You've got the option to avoid level or match-based games and go for something that's more like sandboxy or more open-ended that allows people to come up with their own goal, right? So you could create a video that's based around a specific goal that you've set, and you can end it as soon as you've completed that goal. Like in Minecraft, let's say you're like, hey guys, in today's video, this day, we're going to go and mine diamonds, and we're going to make a whole full suit of diamond armor. And however long that takes is how long it takes, and you can end the video once you've completed that goal, which is going to be better for retention. But it can also be good to have match-based games because it gives anybody who plays it this inherent goal, right? You're giving them the goal. You're giving them the stakes. You have a little bit more control over the structure of the retention and how well the game will retain viewers. So there's a trade-off. I think that I think if you wanted a game, man, it's kind of tough, right? It's kind of tough. I think ultimately Sandbox is going to give you more potential for longevity, but it's going to be more difficult because it puts more of the burden on YouTubers to structure a really interesting and captivating video, and you don't really have any say on it. So it's just things that you got to weigh. Like for me, I'm doing Cuff Bust. Cuff Bust is round-based because I think I think it works in this scenario, but worth considering. But regardless, your level transitions should ideally be as quick and streamlined as possible. Long win animations or score completion time statistics all negatively affect the retention. Ideally, you'd just say, hey, you won, hey, you lost, make it quick, make it snappy, and move on to the next thing and get that new goal in front of people as soon as possible. Another note I made is that it could be useful to, like, if you're doing round-based stuff, maybe instead of having like a bunch of 5-minute rounds, you could lengthen them to now maybe you've got like fewer rounds per video, but they're like 20 or 30 minutes long or something, so that way you could fit a single round into a video so that you're not getting those multi-match dips. This is a very subtle one, and this is 4 minutes into the video. Another thing worth noting, basically, the further into a video you are, the lower the percentages are for the dips, because just, once you're 90% of the way through a video or halfway through the video, most people are there to stay. But here at halfway through, there was a fairly distinct 2% dip. It might be a little bit difficult to see in the video here, but 2% for a player completing a level, and then they're shown these statistics. They then continue. They then continue. Maybe it's loading. Yeah, so that's a 2% dip. Yeah, here's one. This is for point A right here. This dip. This is an 8%. This is a player completing. They've just completed the first level of the game. And I guess that was it. Level completion was probably right here. And again, this was a very quick transition, but you're still seeing a bit of an effect. Next up are notes. Notes this is going to be most common in your story-based games or horror games. Pretty much every game is throwing story out there, and they're trying to throw lore in and all this stuff, but it's actually not good for retention. If you're implementing your notes incorrectly, you're probably going to see a 2 or 3% dip, but there have been a couple examples that I saw that were really atrocious where there was a 6% dip. There are a lot of examples of well implemented notes that didn't cause any dips, so I'm going to go through kind of what the main differences are. So basically, notes are worst for retention when they are very long, right? So multiple paragraphs, a big, like if I've got like this much text, 3 sentences, 4 sentences or more, holy, that's going to be awful for retention. Okay, the more text there is, the less people want to see it. And the sooner in the game that they appear, the worse it will be for retention. So if you open up your game and 30 seconds in, you pick up a note and it's 2 paragraphs long, people are going to go, oh, no, not one of these, and they're going to leave, okay? But there are notes that don't impact retention, and these ones they're going to be really short. I'm talking like 1 sentence, 2 sentences, maybe just a few words in nice, big, legible text. Oftentimes they'd have like pictures on them or drawings. And ideally, they're also placed later in the game, like past the first 3 minutes. If you're past the first 3 minutes of the video or the game, your notes are short, they're visual, then you're probably not going to be causing any issues here. I think the main issue with notes is that they're kind of interrupting progress, especially when it's really early in the video, when progress should be fastest. Progress should be fastest the sooner you are in the game and in the video. So, I think ideally it's best to just avoid using notes entirely, but if you need to, try and just keep them short, visuals and text, and place them a little bit later in the game, right? Try and put it off for a little bit. As well as, another note here, just, again, keeping the font size large enough so that people that are watching on a phone, because again, most people are not, heck, the font size right here is probably pretty illegible. I would assume a lot of people that are watching this video are maybe watching it on a phone. But, most people, they're watching on something small like this, and they can't read the tiny text. So, something to keep in mind. Next up, kind of similar, is expo dumps. Again, this is kind of in the story realm of things. Actually, I take that back. We're going to go back to notes. I'm going to show you some examples. Okay, notes. Let's find some of these here. Okay, this one is point A. This is in the first, what is this? Probably like the first minute and a half. We've got a 3% dip as the player picks up a notebook that has a paragraph of text on screen for some time. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Yeah, this is at 1 minute and 2 seconds. This is what we pick up. And there's a 2% dip off of this. So, yeah, we just walk over, pick it up, and everybody goes, well, not everybody. A few percent of people go, nope, I'm good. This is from the same game, just a little bit later. This is a second note. This is at 2 minutes in. And again, we get a 2% dip. Let's find some more. Okay, this is a pretty atrocious one here. This is a 6% dip, although it does seem to be coming after a... Oh, wait, no, never mind. I was looking at point C. This is point B. Point B right here. So we got a slight 2% dip. For some reason, why is this marked as 6%? This is very clearly not a 6% dip. This is probably more like... Oh, actually, it might be because it's probably dipping from here all the way down to here. Would be my guess. That's probably why I logged it like that. Okay, we got this big long note on screen. This is at 57 seconds into the game, and it just stays on the screen. Now, again, in a commentated video that's edited and there's somebody reading it aloud, these dips will probably be less significant, but again, taking the base data, no commentary, less bias, it's something to keep in mind. Okay, here's another. This is a wild one. This is 12%. This is 12% at 1 minute into the video. Player picks up a note to read. This is point A. This is this dip right here. There was also point C, which was sort of a hold. I guess we'll get into that stuff more later. But we do have a very significant dip that dips and continues dipping until the player puts down the note. I bet I'm losing retention right now because this note is on screen. Okay, we've seen enough of that. You get the point. All right, now on to expo dumps. All right, so long exposition, monologues, dialogues can cause 3 to 10% dips. Okay, similar to notes, the longer they are and the sooner in the game that they take place, the worse the dip will be. Small moments, and it also depends on what the content of the conversation is, which we'll probably get into a bit more later when it comes to some other stuff. But okay, so small moments of monologue that last, let's say, 3 to 5 seconds. I never really saw any examples of it causing dips in retention in those scenarios, especially if it's placed after the first few minutes of gameplay, like notes. But you kind of start entering this risky territory with these 15+ second expo dumps. The dips are also made worse when there's no voice acting. Again, in commentated videos, it kind of acts as voice acting, so that might help mitigate it. Or when there's nothing else going on outside of the expo dump, like let's say you start talking to an NPC and now you're just locked into conversation with the NPC and you can't do anything else. But if you're able to still walk around and stuff, then that seemed to help it as well. So to optimize exposition, keep things short, add voice acting, have either like an active cutscene like I mentioned here, or allowing players to I mentioned here as well, to continue moving around. And ideally hold off on long exposition until a few minutes into the game. If there's certain stuff in, like, let's say a tutorial that you need to get across, try and do it quickly, very short, and try and keep the player active. Just like kind of like sprinkle it in. It's like, oh, you need to learn how to interact with items. Okay, quick little thing right here. Oh, you need to learn how to jump. Oh, quick little thing right there, I'll find a couple examples of these. Okay, this is point A right here, this big dip. This is a long expo dump monologue from an NPC that people are skipping past. Interesting note, the way the timing works out, 1 10-second skip still puts you on the first monologue, and a second skip puts you past a brief gameplay segment right to another monologue. It's also worth noting that not everyone skipped forward. Over 6% just left the video entirely. So that's why this is an interesting one, right? So there's this really weird bump, this C point right here. And I was trying to figure out why on earth there was this bump. And it's because when you're on YouTube, when you double click to skip, or it used to be 10, I think very recently they might have changed it to 5 seconds. And so it seemed like that might have been what this bump was being caused by. But in any case, we see this dip here, which is long expo dump. So it looks like this. We're going through the level, and now we've got this character, and we start talking with them, and people are not interested. They want to see more of the actual game. It's just not engaging. Okay, this is a 6% dip here. This is on point B. This is right here. So it was kind of already on a slight decline, but you could see it declines a bit more sharply, and then it levels off after. I would assume this is after the expo dump, but we'll take a look at this. This is a 6% dip. Also, this is occurring at, 3 minutes in, actually. But you can see we're not remaining very active. This is 2D. There's no cutscene, obviously no voice acting, and we're just kind of sitting, looking at text. I know you're all bored. Probably 6% of you. All right, anyways. So that is what expo dumps look like. Next up, backtracking. This is one that we kind of briefly mentioned a little bit before that kind of oftentimes ties in with player deaths. So backtracking, you're going to see dips of maybe around 3 to 6%. There was one fringe example that was a 10% dip. Backtracking usually happens when a player has died and respawned at a checkpoint. Usually, like, if it's over 10 seconds from where they were killed and are respawning, and it's requiring them to replay some stuff, that's when you're most commonly going to see this. Dips like this can also happen if the player goes down, like, let's say, a long dead-end path, and then they have to retrace their steps and go back through the environment that they've already been through. Some of this can be fixed by simply applying the strategies mentioned on point B, player deaths. Again, if you keep your respawns to a minimum, respawn players as close to where they died as possible, things like that, then that would help retention. And also keep in mind, I'm not saying that this is like how, like 100% sure, like how you should design your game, because a lot of these things that are good for retention act against the actual player experience. Not all of them, but some of them. Like, for example, I mean, usually people don't like backtracking, but if you need to, let's say, punish your player or something for messing up and you need them to backtrack a little bit, or the way that your save system is programmed means it's just not possible to do something like this, then you might just need to ignore this point and just say, hey, this is one of these features that I'm going to have to take a slight loss on, but maybe I can make it up in some other area. You need to be weighing all this stuff carefully. Don't just take this and be like, oh, well, I guess I can't have respawning. Blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that's not what I'm saying. It's just, it's something to consider. Something to consider. See if you can fit it into your design. See if there are creative ways that you can design your game. Like in Cuff Bust, for example, there's no death. There's no death in Cuff Bust, and there's no, like, for example, you can hinder people's progress. You can mess them up. You can knock people out, but then they revive after like 5-10 seconds. Even when they're knocked out, they can still look around. They can still talk. If you get handcuffed, which is kind of the Cuff Bust equivalent of death, you can still run around. You can still talk to your friends. And you can get uncuffed, right? And you can uncuff yourself as well. There are ways to do that. And so that's how I'm getting around player deaths. At least hopefully. We'll see how it works in practice. But that's part of it. Another good example is being downed in video games. In a lot of games, you get downed. You don't immediately die, especially in like multiplayer team-based stuff. And that's good for retention. Not only in the context of videos and live streams, but it also is good for like actual player retention, the people that are actually playing your game. It will make it more engaging if you're not immediately out. So yeah, that was just a note that I wanted to mention there. So backtracking, let's pull up a few examples here. Okay, this is one example. This is point A right here, slight dip, nothing crazy. It's somewhere around 4%. The note here that I have is that the player dies and respawns, and the player isn't technically backtracking, but it looks like they are. So this is at 58 seconds in. I guess you'd probably need to see the earlier parts of this video to kind of fully understand, but whatever. We'll find a better example. Okay, this seems like a good one. This one seems, yeah, this is definitely a good example. Okay, this is a 10% dip. This is a minute in. This is this point A dip here, this big crater. So the player dies and has to restart the game. They're backtracking over a bunch of already seen content. During this minute, there's a whole minute of backtracking here. There's a deep dip in retention where many people have skipped. So not all of them have left. It seems like a lot of people are simply skipping ahead in this case. But he was my best friend. Yeah, so we've just lost. And then we go back to the menu, and it's just retreading the exact same stuff that we saw in the beginning. This one is a 3% dip at D. This is a very subtle one. Very subtle one. But we've gone down a hall to this area here, and we realize, oh, we actually can't go through there. So then we have to go back and I believe get like a torch or something. So we have to go back, walking slowly, and there's a slight dip. It's in this case, it's probably just people skipping ahead because it looks like the retention does. It kind of pops back up. It's just a very, very minor dip in this case. Probably wasn't a lot of backtracking. It's probably like 5 seconds. We got point B here. This looks like a slightly better example. You can see this slight dip. This is around 5%. This is the player dying and respawning, and they have to replay a whole level, which comes out to around 20 seconds of backtracking. So they've just died, and they're restarting the level. That pretty self-explanatory. Next up, credit scenes. Credits are a pretty simple one. But it's also one that you might not need to. It's one that you can take moderately seriously, depending on the kind of game that you're making. Ultimately, here's the deal. As soon as the credits roll, people are like, oh, okay, the game is over. All right, the game is done. There's nothing else to see here. And so people start leaving in droves, okay? Any viewers that you have left, they are going to immediately start dropping off as soon as your credits start. So ideally, you would keep your credits short if you're putting your credits in at all. Ideally, you'd probably just put your credits behind like a button on your menu screen. But if you really want to have an end credit sequence, don't try to make it longer. Don't try to inflate it. I've seen some developers that try and inflate their credit scenes to make it look like it was a bigger production and more impressive. Don't do that. It's not good for retention. It's also worth noting that you should not put anything important after your credits. Okay, if you've got a post-credit scene, this is something that I did in Choo Choo Charles. If you've got something that you actually want everybody to see, put it before your credits. Because again, once the credits hit, everybody starts leaving, and then you're going to be left with a fraction of that for the people who are actually going to see the post-credit stuff. It's also worth noting that since naturally the credit scene of a game is going to be at the end, the retention drop-off isn't going to affect the overall view duration of a video as significantly as some of these other dips. Even if, like, let's say you're losing 30% of your viewers on the credit scene, it's probably not going to affect things as much as maybe a 10% dip on an expo dump that was really early in the video, right? Because since it's happening at the very, very end, the way that it averages out isn't going to be quite as significant. Also, the length of your credits and the length of the game. Like, let's say you've got a game jam game, something super, super short. It's like a 5-minute game, and then you've got like a 1-minute credit sequence. Like, that's going to have a significant impact on the retention. But if you've got like a 2-hour game and you've got like a 20-second credits sequence at the end, like, that's not really going to affect anything super negatively. But again, if you're trying to optimize everything as well as possible, just don't have a credit sequence. Just put it behind a button on your menu. Lots of games do that. That's what I'm doing for Cuff Bust. It'd be weird to put it anywhere else in a game like that anyways, but... Okay, we'll show off a couple examples of this. This is a 30% dip. This is point C here towards the end. This is when the credits start rolling. Oh, wait, you actually can't see that. There we go. So credits start rolling, and immediately you see this massive dip, and it just starts going down, 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 down. Credits roll, and immediately it's dipping for the rest of the video here. Other examples. This is a 25% dip. This is point A. You can see this massive dip. Massive dip as soon as those credits start. Yep. And then looks like those were the only couple of examples, but at least the only ones that I logged, but whatever. Anyways, next up are walking simulators. So, these examples, there's not a lot of super specific stuff logged, because it's basically the way that a walking simulator looks is just like really sharp dip in the beginning, and then it just kind of keeps going down, because there's typically not really much of anything very engaging going on. Not a lot of bumps, not a lot of major dips, just constant decline. Basically, walking simulators, it's bad for retention, all right? But there are scenarios that I've seen where if a walking simulator has a decent variety of scenery, and no specific like sort of area or biome or set piece is, being shown on screen for too long, then people will be more engaged. Again, still not super engaged, but a variety in your environment is very useful. If you have a long dirt pathway through a samey forest that players need to spend an entire minute running down, retention is going to drop pretty significantly. But if you add things along the path, you've got interesting landmarks ahead that people can anticipate getting to, right? People are like, oh, what's that interesting looking house at the end of the path? Right now there's some form of question in their mind, like, what is that? I want to see what is there. So if you can, design your levels in such a way where there are things people can see. There are goals that people can see, landmarks, things to walk towards. Then it's like, in a way, it acts as a progress bar, essentially, right? How close you are to that interesting thing in the distance, that's like your progress along this progress bar. And so that will help increase retention. Let me see if I can find a couple of real examples here. This is probably the best example right here. This is, you explore, it's a very, very nice looking game. You know, as far as walking simulators go, this is about as pretty as you can get. You explore an Icelandic environment. I believe you get to take pictures. You take pictures of stuff. There's like photography. But this is basically just a 15-minute video where you walk around. And you can see here, the retention gets down really, 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 really low, excluding a couple points like this point C here. In this spot, the player finds the last location that they must visit and photograph, and they find a person. There's an actual person. Wowie. This is the first person seen in the game. Their silhouette is visible, and they're standing at the end of a cliff or ravine. The player takes a picture of them, and the game ends. So it's something different happening, and it's the ending of the game. So there's a handful of people that are fast forwarding to see that specific part. But in any case, yeah, walking simulators, bad for retention. But there are some things to learn based off of environment design and how you could design an environment that's a little bit more engaging. Okay, dullness. This one is a little bit more broad. This isn't super specific, but basically, dull, boring, or overly slow parts of your game can easily cause 3 to 15% dips, whatever that might look like. I gave a handful of examples down here, but basically these dips are worsened by length of the dull moment and by whether or not the player is currently working towards a clear goal. You know, again, this kind of also encompasses things like those loading screens and those level completion screens, things like that. You know, if you've got 5 seconds of walking down a hallway towards a door, that's not a dull moment, because also, again, like we talked about in the environment design, if there's a goal, if there's clearly something that you are walking towards and there's some mystery around what you're walking towards, then that's going to be more engaging. But if the player, and this is like a real example, if the player walks into an elevator and spends 15 seconds riding the elevator and you're just sitting there in an elevator, you could easily see a 5% dip. Usually dips caused by dullness are noticeable after around 10 seconds of this kind of just dull, repetitive, nothing really happening kind of moment. You know, some other examples that I had here that were causing some dips were like 10 seconds of like climbing a ladder. Like players walking around, they're running around, they're playing the game normally, and then they get to a ladder and then they're just climbing, and that was causing a dip. 5 seconds of a black screen during a cutscene, so it might have been something loading, but just that black screen, that's not engaging. 15 plus seconds of aimless walking, again, like kind of with the oh, I just realized I skipped a section, but we'll go back and hit on that one. You know, with the walking simulators, it doesn't take long, is what I'm saying, for the retention to start dipping on this stuff. Which is also why, again, this is one of these examples where it's like, to have stuff constantly happening every 15 seconds, that's kind of overkill, because this is one of these things where YouTubers recognize, like, okay, this part is kind of dull, I'm going to cut it out of the video. So in a YouTube or TikTok scenario, oftentimes things like this will be remedied quite easily. Again, in live streams, not so much. In live streams, you can't get around it. But again, it's just stuff to consider while you're designing, okay? Long, boring tutorial sequences, you know, over-explaining stuff that doesn't need to get explained at that point in the game. You know, ideally, you know, kind of chop it up. Explain stuff in steps across, you know, maybe the first 15 minutes of your game. If people don't need to know how to crouch until a half an hour into the game, don't teach them how to crouch until a half an hour into the game, right? Don't overload them with boring information. So yeah, dullness. All right, let's go back up to lighting and obscure style. So this one, there were a handful of games that I was seeing where the retention seemed to be dipping a lot more than it should have. I was like, what is going on that's causing this really steady decline? And what it seems like is games that are overly dark visually, or that have like really like kind of convoluted art styles, really harsh art styles, it makes the viewing experience frustrating. It makes people more likely to leave. It's just if the visuals are kind of grating or difficult to see and identify, then you're not going to see like massive focused dips. You're just going to see a more steady decline over time. So often this is going to be seen in horror games that are really dark, but also there were some other games that were also just that had kind of harsh art styles. I think this might have been one of them. So there's a couple other things going on in this specific example, I think. But so there's two things. One, this game is high action, and we'll talk about why action is really bad for retention in a little bit. Probably a long bit, because this video is gonna be friggin' long. We're not very far through this. We got a lot more stuff to go. But yeah, we'll talk about why action is bad. So action is probably a contributing factor here, but also you could very clearly see the art style here is, it's cool, but it's very dark. It's kind of obscure. And it's a little bit difficult to see kind of what's going on. And so as a result, again, there's other factors as well, but you can see the retention goes way, way, way down. Now, largely or partially, at least probably in regards to action, but we're going to get into that later. Hey, here's actually a good example. I'm just scrolling through here. This is a great example of level completions that I didn't see when I was talking about that section. This is grapple hoops. Every single time, you can see like the retention stair stepping, and there's a couple other examples in this document that I have of that, but you could see the retention stair steps every single time that a level ends, and that looks kind of like they're very short rounds. Oh, also, here's an example of a dull sequence where we're just going down an elevator waiting for stuff to load. Again, probably better than just a straight black, like, loading screen. But if there are other ways to get around it, ideally you should. So, anyways, you get the point. So, back to where we were. Repetition. So, repetition is kind of like I've got written here. It's a tough one to get specific on, but it's worth bringing up and thinking about. Basically, if your core gameplay element or core gameplay loop is constantly repeating in, like, let's say under 10 seconds, then you probably have a repetitive game that's going to cause people to become bored very, very quickly. Think Flappy Bird, okay? This is very closely related to action scenes and how constant repetitive action causes massive dips in retention. Again, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Examples would be stuff like Night of the Consumers. This is one that it seemed like, since the gameplay is pick up a box, put stuff on a shelf, that gameplay loop seems to be a little bit too short to keep people like really engaged. And obviously, here's the deal. That game has gone plenty viral. There are other things that are carrying it, but that specific element is slightly working against it. Again, the goal isn't necessarily, I mean, ideally you should probably try and implement as many of these features as you can, but it's not like you can't go viral by committing a couple of these sins, right? Yeah, so in Night of the Consumers, what we have is where it's kind of just generally dropping off a bit faster than some other games. Again, it holds fairly well in the beginning, but it's kind of like once people have seen it, they're like, okay, I kind of get the idea. And then it seems like the engagement kind of falls off a little bit. Let's see, another example here was ASMR Simulator. ASMR Simulator. Yeah, so this is one where there's not really a goal to keep people engaged. The gimmick gets old pretty quickly, and people start dropping off really fast to, by the end, it's, down to 17%. Or sorry, no, down to 17% by the end of the first minute. That's pretty bad retention. And again, it's just kind of, it's the same, and this is a very short video too. QWERTY. Hey, there you go. Also keep in mind, I'm not bashing any of these games. I hope that's clear. That should be pretty clear. I'm not bashing these games. Again, I'm just saying, hey, these are statistics. These are examples. Because, yeah, there you go. Basically, general repetition is not as bad for retention as high action games. Like, really, like, again, that's one of the most interesting findings that I had. But, again, later. Anyways, but again, repetition, still something that you'd want to avoid. I think the best way to think of it is that while you don't want a game to get dull, you need to give people variety in the gameplay loop and let it breathe a bit. Ideally, if you're giving players a little bit of time and space instead of making a Flappy Bird style game where the player simply flaps over and over and over again until the end of time, then you'd probably be in a better scenario. Also keep in mind, Flappy Bird, while yes, it was viral not necessarily because the no commentary gameplay videos were really engaging. Again, that's kind of one of these examples where it's like the people who are commentating the videos, the people who are making the videos, depending on what they're working with, they might be able to spin it in a way that is really interesting. So it's like there are certain things where it's like you can get away with stuff because something else happens to be working in your favor. And in the case of Flappy Bird, it's like it was one of these things that was like, it was like ironically big. People are like, oh my gosh, what is Flappy Bird? Oh my gosh, this game's so stupid. Why is this game so big? Everybody needs to play. It was a weird thing. It was a weird thing. So this is, we're getting into a new category now. Okay. This is features that help hold retention. The last section there, we're talking about stuff that's going to make a game go, right? Those are our dips. Anything that's causing clear decreases. Now we're talking about the features that are going to make a game go hold. And then maybe it kind of goes down a bit more and then it holds, right? These are our holds, right? This is what we want, right? Because ideally we'd have a game that has a retention chart that looks like this. It as soon as it starts, people are loving it, they're engaged, and they're engaged until the end, right? The closer we get to this, the closer we get to everybody in the world knowing that your game exists, okay? So, holds are very important, and that's just our general engagement. Chase scenes are very interesting, and I've got a comparison here to jump scares, but I guess those are going to be mentioned in the features that bump retention, because that's another category that we have here. But chase scenes. So, similar to jump scares, spoiler alert, jump scares cause big bumps in retention. But chases also do a similar kind of thing because oftentimes they kind of go hand in hand, especially within horror games. So we can easily see 5 to 10% bumps, but there are examples of chase scenes that cause as high as 35% bumps. And this is because people are rewatching that section. That's going to be, your retention is looking something like this. And then you've got a big chase scene, jump scare, and then it looks something like this, right? This is people, they're rewatching it because it's just that awesome and intense or whatever. And obviously that's going to increase your overall average retention by that much. The really strong aspect, though, of a chase scene is how well they retain viewers. So a good chase scene can easily, and I mean like easily, hold viewers' attention rock solid for like at least 2 minutes. Okay, there was one example that I had of a 5-minute hold on a chase scene. Okay, I'm talking like, you're going down and then the chase scene starts and it's like, boom. Okay, and then the chase scene ends and things continue going down. Chase scenes are crazy for retention. So some shorter chases in the 10 to 30 second range will cause small bumps and they'll look on a chart much more similar to jump scares. So to make a perfectly optimized chase scene, you'd start it off with an intense jump scare to kind of spike retention, get people rewatching because people really want, for some for some reason, people really like rewatching jump scares, even in a no commentary context. It would make a lot of sense, obviously, in the context of commentated videos, because maybe the YouTuber's going, oh my gosh, whoa, that was crazy, oh, I'm so scared, and they fall out of their chair and they scream and whatever. Sure, I would understand why people would want to rewatch that, but even in non-commentated videos, people rewatch jump scares. Like, always. Again, we'll get into that more later. But, so obviously, if you're making an optimized chase scene in a horror game, then you can start it with a jump scare. Don't jump scare people in a random non-horror game. But if you're doing horror, then that would work really well. You reveal the enemy immediately, and you start engaging viewers. So then what you're going to do is you're going to slowly increase the intensity of the chase as time goes on. You want the audience to feel like they're inching closer and closer to dying, but without actually dying. This is, kind of as we mentioned with player deaths, right? You want the chasing to feel difficult, to feel intense. You want people to feel like it's right on my back. He's right on my back. He's gonna catch me any second now, but without actually being in danger, right? You want to have sort of an invisible, an invisible little guardian angel keeping the player safe so that they don't actually hit a player death and cause a dip in retention. So if the player actually dies, right, flow is going to break and people are going to leave the video. So make your chases easy while still feeling dangerous. To raise tension, you can show the enemy character getting closer and closer to the player over time, or raise the stakes with new challenges and obstacles to overcome while trying to run away. Basically, if people are the issue with a lot of, I'm just going to use horror games as the main examples here because it's the easiest and the most obvious. Usually, when you're running away from an enemy, you're facing forward and they're behind you. You can't actually see them. And so that's not as good for retention because you might be running straight forward for 2 minutes, but you don't actually see the enemy. You don't know how close they are behind you. This is where Choo Choo Charles has such an insane leg up on most horror games, is because the way that the mechanics work, the train is moving forward, but you're on the back of the train facing backwards. So you can, you're being chased and you can see the enemy constantly. He's right there. And this is one of these retention things that I honestly got lucky with. I got lucky with this. I did not know how powerful chase scenes are when I was designing Choo Choo Charles. I just knew okay, cool enemy character, some cool mechanics, some action, and I just happened to design the chase gameplay in such a way that it is insanely good for retention. And I didn't realize that because, again, I did this retention study. This was after that game came out. But as I was finding all this out, I was like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Because, that game went way more viral than I was expecting it to. And these are some of the reasons why. Okay, so you can also increase the intensity of the chase with, your music. Obviously, that's an easy way to up the intensity. If the enemy is physically far away, I already noted it here. If the enemy is physically farther away and people can see that they're further away, then they're going to start to feel safe and stakes kind of start to lower. So you want to keep the enemy close and make sure the player knows that they're close. When ending your chase scene, it's also best to not end it too abruptly. Because that gives people a kind of an increased sense of safety. It's like, oh, okay, I'm safe. Goal completed. Goal accomplished. Again, it's if your chase scene is big, that's great because you could hold people for a few minutes. But if they feel like, okay, I've completed the challenge, then you're going to see this big dip. So ideally, you need to smoothly transition to a new goal as effectively as possible over the course of maybe 10, 20, 30 seconds, rather than just saying, oh, enemy's gone, you're no longer in danger. Then there's too large of a, kind of a disbursement of intensity. So ideally, people will be like, okay, I think I escaped. I think I'm in the clear, but I'm still cautious, right? That's the state that you want to keep viewers in. So let's take a look at some examples. This is one of these data points that was insanely consistent. All right, so this is an example. This is point K here. This is approximately a 1 minute hold. And I'll rewind slightly here. So basically, we're just walking along, we're just chilling, and then all of a sudden, we start getting chased. And we get chased for a minute, and we're running, and we're running, and we're running. And we can kind of, see, this is a creative one. I don't know if this is like a transparent kind of shadow monster, or if this is the shadow of the monster. But either way, you can kind of see a little bit that, like, oh, the enemy is still behind us. And the game is third person. This is the player character. So this is kind of a creative way that we're kind of able to see how close or far the enemy is from us. This is an example from Mr. Hop's Playhouse 2. So you can see our retention was dipping quite a bit as the game was beginning, right? And then as soon as the gameplay starts and the monster comes in, we've got a brief hold, because it is a very brief chase scene, but we'll go ahead and take a quick look at this. So cutscene stops, we hop into here, we get up. And then we've got a chase scene. And our retention is being held. Okay, we've got a 30-second hold here. This is point G. You can see this is, if I scroll down a little more, this is also an example of one that I believe is opening with a, it might be opening with a jump scare. Either that or it's just, again, just basic chase bumping. So this is a chase sequence with an enemy at G point. We'll go ahead and just take a look at this example. We're walking around and oh no, and here's the enemy. We're being chased. And we'll see if there are example, if we get to, oh yeah, yes, we could see, oh, look, they're right there. The enemy, it was so close, oh, close but no cigar, right? That increases intensity and helps hold retention. Here's another one. This is a 1 minute and 15-second hold. This is point H right here. It was kind of going down. There was a slight bump here for a monster reveal. Kind of started going down again a little bit. There was a slight dip when a player died. And then, actually, it looks like this was D point right here. A chase started, and then we died, and then right here, we're redoing the chase. So, we'll take a look at this one. There's the monster. And now we're being chased. And again, this is a good example where, because it's not like first person or something, we've got this 2D perspective. We can see, oh crap, look how close they're getting. We're getting so close to dying, but we're not. And another mechanic here that's making that even better. Take a look at this. So our default move speed for this player character is slower than the default move speed of the enemy. So what you have is constantly the enemy is getting closer to the player, but there's this speed up ability that actually is keeping us. So like on average, we are significantly faster and we're not actually in danger. Again, this is kind of one of these guardian angel mechanics. That's keeping the player alive and making the chase easy without, you know, while still keeping intensity up. So that's a good one. So that's kind of a summary of chase scenes. Alrighty. Took a little break. Back at it again. Let's see how much more of this we can get through here. Okay, so we just went over chase scenes. Okay, next thing. Boss fights. Alright, boss fights are very good for holding retention. Ultimately, I'll just read through here. Boss fights, very good for holding retention. Attention, yeah, whatever, same thing. And there are many examples of them holding attention rock solid for 1 to 3 minutes. I suspect you could effectively hold people for even longer, over 5 minutes, potentially, fairly easily. And the way that most boss fights are formatted just kind of automatically leads to them being just well formatted for retention. You know, you're fighting a unique enemy in a unique, you know, environment. It's refreshing, and the enemy being more dangerous and more in control of the situation than the player is, which is similar to how a chase scene is formatted, right? In a chase scene, the player is in danger. You're running. You can't even fight back. You are, you know, cat and mouse, and you are not the cat, right? You are in danger. And so it's a similar kind of thing in a boss fight, right? You're facing a very formidable foe. So this raises the stakes and intensity. Also similar to chase scenes, having a multi-stage boss helps to raise the intensity even further and helps re-engage people who may have started getting a little bit bored, since there's kind of a new twist or threat to, you know, change the combat dynamic and just, again, make it seem more challenging, make it seem like the boss is in even more control. And that's kind of how I think you could potentially get into this kind of like 5-minute range. Effectively is like, you know, maybe you get 3 minutes in and you kind of switch it up, and then you get another few minutes in and you switch it up again, or something like that. Essentially, if you have a good standard boss fight, it'll probably be good for retention. This is the same principle, or sorry, the same principle applies pretty well to mini bosses, which can easily hold people's attention for at least 30 seconds. You know, so periodic encounters with larger, more unique enemies that are more difficult to avoid or kill. You know, again, it kind of shifts the power dynamic from boring, repetitive action sequences to something more similar to a boss fight, where, again, you know, this sort of, even if it's a smaller, you know, it's not a full-on boss fight, but you've got a more powerful enemy that is putting the player in more danger, and it'll help keep people's attention. As well as this stuff that's listed here, another thing that's really useful with boss fights and how well they hold attention is that oftentimes they literally have a progress bar on them, right? You've got a health bar above the boss. You know how close you are to defeating them, or how far you are to defeating them, which means even if you die, you know it's like, okay, I was this close. And then if you die again, but you got a little bit closer, you're like, okay, I'm getting better at it. You know, so there's, again, clear progress towards the goal of defeating this boss. I think, again, this is one of these things that with Choo Choo Charles worked out really, really well. Charles kind of acts like every encounter that you have with him during gameplay kind of acts as a mini boss fight, because you can't beat him during those times. You know, he'll come back after a little while, but he's a large, threatening enemy. You can only knock his health bar down a little bit, but the health bar is still visible even during those encounters. And so because of that, it's every single one of those encounters is even more engaging, even more so than, you know, just a game that has like a chase sequence, because we talked about before. It also works really well because of the chase sequence, but then also having this mini boss type angle to it also helps it out even more. All right, so here's going to be our first example. This first example isn't a great one because it's occurring towards the end of the video. I don't know if I have any examples that are going to be showing up like earlier in gameplay, because typically boss fights are going to be at the end of a game or at the end of a video and things like that. But you can see here, retention has been kind of steadily declining, but then once the boss fight starts, which is this B hold here, there's a slight bump and a rock solid hold, and even another slight bump when the boss is defeated. So we'll take a look at this real quick. So, boom, here we are. It's a boss fight. We're fighting the boss. I think standard gameplay here is, what is it? Contra inspired. You run around, you shoot stuff. But this boss fight held attention pretty well. We've got another example here. In this one, this is a fairly short video, but again, we could see attention was steadily kind of declining, and then we've got this slight bump and hold for the boss fight. And again, this is a very similar way that this graph is playing out, and a slight bump again once the boss is actually defeated. This is the boss fight. I think before the boss fight, it's just, again, it's kind of one of these 2D run and gun. It's kind of a retro style. It's actually a very similar game to the last one we were just looking at here. And so we fight the boss for a little bit, and that's it. Another example here, again, it's the holds aren't quite as definitive as some of the other stuff that we've been looking at, but it's still noticeable. And again, very, very similar kind of chart here. We can see steady decline, and then we can see it starts to go up a little bit more, as I'm assuming people are kind of like fast forwarding to this point in the video. Slight bump here as the boss fight starts, and it holds rock solid until it bumps up again when the boss is defeated. So this game, again, it's kind of a high action, I think sort of level based. It's Angerfoot by Devolver. And we get to this boss fight level where we fight a giant evil helicopter, which is very different from anything else that, oh yeah, it's the Goo-copter. Goo-copter. Interesting name. But you can also see, we've also got this beautiful little progress bar, health bar, but it's acting as a progress bar. It's like a loading screen, right? So, that was a good example there. Let's see. Okay, this is an example of a mini boss. This is in, what is this in? Rip Out. We got this E hold right here. We can see there was a slight bump C when there was, it looks like kind of sort of a pseudo jump scare, slight jump scare there. And it was kind of going down, and then it seems to hold pretty well for about 30 seconds. Okay, this looks like an arena. Yeah, I guess I kind of just time-stamped it a little bit early. Yeah, there we go. There's the boss. Boss / mini-boss. Okay. Cool. That's that. And that's about it. Those are kind of the key examples that I've got there. All right. Next thing. Parkour. Now, this is a feature that there were only like 2 examples, so I wasn't really able to pull like super specific data for this. But I did notice that there were a couple of games that were like pretty high action, that shooter games and stuff like that. And oftentimes they were level-based games, right? So you'd go through, you'd kill a wave of bad guys, and then you'd get to the checkpoint and then load into the next level. And I was noticing that the levels that had more parkour seemed to be holding a bit better. And the ones that were more like just high action seemed to be declining a little bit more. So it was, again, not something that was common enough that I was able to like really put anything super solid together, but it was something that I noticed that I thought was kind of interesting and made a note of. I'm assuming this is just because parkour is a less common feature in games, so it's maybe just kind of more interesting for people to see it. So that's about it there. This is one example here in grapple hoops. I think we looked at another example from for something else on grapple hoops a little bit ago, but this was, again, you can kind of see, yes, it was because we were talking about the stair stepping on the levels. So what you can kind of see is you've got these perfect holds on this D hold and the E hold here. And those are both parkour levels. Whereas some of these other ones, you can see they're kind of declining a little bit more. Again, it's very subtle, but I think there were a couple other games where there were similar patterns. So, clear definition of goals. Here's the deal. This is kind of just to summarize a lot of kind of the overall strategy that I'm seeing with most of the stuff that's causing these retention holding features. And ultimately, again, kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the video, the key pattern here that ties together all these features is that there's a clear definition of a goal, anticipation of something to come, and an increase in stakes. I've gone through this concept pretty thoroughly in this section, but I feel like reiterating it. Chase scenes, boss fights, and everything else on this list don't have specific individual reasons why they hold attention, right? There's not something magical about a boss fight, but it's that it happens to be formatted in such a way that there's a clear goal, there's a clear conflict, there is a clear threat, and we can see progress towards completion of this goal. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that you don't need to make a game that has just these features on this list, right? You could create completely new features as long as they are following this clear definition of goals, right? Because that's what's actually making these gameplay mechanics so valuable from a retention perspective. So there are other ways that you can do this, right? There are other ways that you can hold retention. These just happen to be the ones that are common in most games already. You could go completely outside the box and do something completely new. And as long as it's fitting within this kind of structure, it will probably do really well on the retention front. Next up, features that are going to bump your retention. First up is jump scares. Jump scares are the most consistent and effective way that I have found to get people to rewatch a part of a video. Commonly creating anywhere from 2% on like the really low end to as high as like 25% bumps in retention. There are many factors involved in this wide range, so I'm going to go over those. The main factor is going to be the intensity of the jump scare, right? A subtle jump scare and stinger, that's going to be usually pretty small, right? You see somebody peeking out from a doorway and there's a little like whoa type of sound or something. That's maybe a 2, 3, 4%. But really intense jump scares are you're usually going to see a larger jump. I've seen plenty that are like in the 10 to 20% range. An interesting attribute of jump scares is that individual jump scares lose their novelty very, very quickly. If you reuse the same or a very, very similar jump scare multiple times, you might see a 10% bump the first time, and then the next time it'll be like 5%, and then the next time it'll be like 2%, and then passed around like 3 uses, you're not really going to see any significant increase in retention because people have already seen it. They've already seen this jump scare. There's no reason to rewatch it again. They've already seen it. So if you want to keep your jump scares as effective as possible, what you could do is you can have multiple enemy characters that all have different jump scare animations. I think that's probably one of the most common ones. Or you could perhaps have, maybe it's the same character, but there's different like very distinctly different jump scare animations. Like maybe in one they grab you and they rip your head off, and then in one they like eat you and swallow you whole, or I don't know. There's like different things that you could potentially do with it in order to avoid reusing the same jump scares, because again, then you can make the most out of it, right? You'll get more rewatches. This is something that FNAF happens to have done really, really well. The original FNAF game, I mean, it's got a lineup of like 4 main characters, I think. 4 main characters, and then there's a couple of other, you got like your Golden Freddy and all of that. So throughout the game, if everybody is, let's say, rewatching a jump scare generally around like 1 or 2 times, and there's 4 different jump scares, you're going to get 8 rewatches across sections of a video about the game or something like that, right? So it's good for that type of stuff. And any other, of these like mascot horror games that have lots of characters in them, that's better for retention because their jump scares are causing people to rewatch every single time that there's a different character playing a different jump scare animation. Here is one. This is Eye Point, this big bump here. This is a 12% bump. This is a game we've looked at a couple examples from. And boom, there was our jump scare. We go along here, and then, yeah, big enemy character comes out and kills us. Very cool. This is a 1% bump on B Point. Very subtle. It's almost not even noticeable. This is a small stinger here. Yeah, little character walks past the door. People aren't really rewatching it that much. They're like, okay, yeah, I saw it. There's another example in here of another small stinger, and then for a more intense jump scare, there was a 3% bump. This is this D bump right here. Okay, that didn't really show me much. Da 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 da. There's our guy. And boom. Okay, cool. Jump scare. 3%. Okay, this one is B point. This is big spike here. 10% approximately. This is the first reveal of the enemy character and a close call. The player almost gets caught. Walking along. We're chilling. The door is locked. And hey presto. Big jump scare. And then we've got another big one here. This is a 15%. This is on Night of the Consumers here. They've got great jump scares. 15%, you can see E point here. And it also, there's a note that the death sequence is a bit drawn out, about 15 seconds, and has a suspenseful chase, which is probably why we're seeing like multiple points up here. Almost like a very short hold. But we'll take a look here at this example. Okay. There was that. Oh, right, it's the whole... I forgot about the manager mechanic. So it's almost like two jump scares. Jump scare, chase scene, jump scare. So that's why you've got a slightly longer, slightly larger bump there. Okay, we got another 9% here. Oh, this is actually on one of my games. This is on my Beautiful Paper Smile. This is a 9% at 240. This is the B spike right here. Player opens up their inventory, and there's this Easter egg jump scare thing where if you try and take off your mask, it does this. It tells you that you're not allowed to remove your face, and that's it. So that was a significant bump. This is one from Garten a Ban Ban, from my buddies at the Euphoric Brothers. This is a what is this? A 5% bump. B point right here. For this subtle enemy reveal with good old Opila Bird peeking around the corner. Yep, that's it there. Basically, I think you kind of get the point. It would be kind of nice if I could show off how the jump scares get less and less powerful. So in this one, the jump scare, I believe, is the same every time, except, I suppose, for this last one. This last one is different. But we've got the same jump scare. I'll show you in a second. The first time, we get a 10% bump, which is B point. The second time, the player has another jump scare encounter identical to the first jump scare. This is a 6% bump. This is C point right here. D point, there's yet another almost identical jump scare, except this time the humanoid is black and not red. The atmosphere doesn't shift anymore. I don't know exactly what I meant by that. We'll take a look in a second. That's D point right down here. And then we also had E point, which is another almost identical jump scare. Pretty much the same as the last one, it looks like. Hardly even a bump. It's almost not even worth noting. But we'll take a look at these for reference. This is our first jump scare. In this game, we just kind of, we walk around and we scan stuff. And then we do a scan and there's a person. Ooh, how spooky. It's pretty cool. All right. And then essentially the same thing again. Okay. You pretty much see, except it's in a slightly different environment here. And then we've got one more here, and I won't even take a look at the last one, because we get the idea. So that's jump scares. The one other thing that I should mention about jump scares that's interesting is that horror games can kind of get away with having death sequences more so than non-horror games, because like we talked about previously, obviously, like in most games, death screens, player deaths, interrupt progress, right? In the context of a horror game, it's going to be paired with a jump scare, which increases retention. And it's almost like the jump scares are part of the experience, right? People are prepared for these deaths, and they almost kind of want to see the jump scares. They want to see the player die at least once so that they can see kind of what's going on. And so I think this is, again, another reason why, as you've perhaps probably kind of seen here, there are a lot of reasons why horror games are inherently more viral, and why they lend themselves better, just due to how they're typically formatted, they lend themselves better to virality due to chase scenes and jump scares, and they can kind of get away with player deaths when other games can't. It is an interesting thing where jump scares kind of counteract the negative effects of death sequences. So that's something to note. Next up, secrets. Interesting secrets or hidden rooms I've seen cause slight 2 to 5% bumps. I would assume that these are probably coming from, people who have already watched a gameplay video or who have already played the game, but didn't know about the particular secret that's being shown. And so then they rewatch to get a closer look. These bumps are usually pretty subtle because, again, most people are going to be watching a video of a game for the first time. So they don't necessarily know that something is secret unless it's very clear through the gameplay that this is something that the player is stumbling into. So this was something that I also didn't have a lot of examples of. I don't know if... Yeah, okay, Night of the Consumers had one of these. This is a 5% bump on F. You can see right here, slight bump, where the player finds in the staff-only room this little corner that they can break into. So, little things like that, there's some value to them. All right, this one. Controversial. But, hey, here's the deal. I'm just the messenger. I mean, this really shouldn't be a surprise. Looking at the success of games like is it Stellar Blade? Yeah, Stellar Blade. So looking at the success of games like that, spoiler alert, there are a lot of gooners on the internet. And gooners like rewatching parts of games with sexualized female characters. Shocker. Here's the deal. I am not planning on putting any sexualized characters of any kind in my games, because I'm not trying to appeal to gooners. But since I was collecting the data, this was data that was consistent. So I had to log it. This is an example, bro. The dip reasons that I wrote down are almost comical. 3 to 6% dip anytime there's no demon girls on screen. 3 to 6% bump every time there's a demon girl on screen. And then I've got a hold at A, a 3-minute hold, this section here, which is, at the end of the game, there's a segment where you go around and talk to all of your demon wives, and there's no gameplay, it's just demon girls, and that's the part of the video that has the strongest hold. It's just kind of sort of visual novel. You just go and talk with everybody. So there you go. The gaming gooners have been exposed. Not necessarily saying I recommend it as a strategy, but it's there. All right, random, interesting moments. So some games, there'll just be like some random, funny, or interesting moment. It's just something random. And I've seen 2 to 7% bumps for this kind of stuff. And when I say random, I mean like really random, like really out of the blue. Maybe it just went over my head. But yeah, kind of just depends on how impactful the moment is. So, for example, there was a 2% bump when a player in one game started riding a hedgehog with a tiny gnome. I guess I'll see if I can find the example of it. And then there was a 7% bump when a camera slowly zoomed in on a fish that starts just talking to the player. And then there was another one, again, another fish moment. I'm pretty sure this is a completely different game. A fish randomly fell out of the sky in front of the player. Probably not something that you want to put all throughout your game, but it was an interesting thing to note. Let me look for that hedgehog one, because that was kind of a cute one. Small 2% bump here. This is... Oh, there was also a good chase scene in this one. And for some reason, I didn't actually log it here. But you can see I mentioned it here. I might actually show off that chase scene, because it was formatted pretty well. So B point, again, kind of, it's a slight bump. It's nothing crazy. So we're just kind of walking through the forest, right? Going along. And then we see a hedgehog. And there's this little gnome dude just chilling. And so then we hop on and we get to ride a hedgehog. And I guess 2% of people thought that was really amusing. And I mean, they're not wrong. It is. Look, it's so cute. Bro, the water effects are wild. This game is just really beautiful. But in any case, hedgehog, very cute. Bro, I can't get over the water effects. That looks great. Yeah, and then also, real quick, let me just show off this chase scene. Because, again, this is another example of a chase scene that isn't in first person, where you can clearly see where the enemy is in relation to your player character. And it had a really significant impact on the retention. Okay, yeah, right here. We're skipping along. We're chilling. We got enemy person up here. So we're still waiting. We're still anticipating the enemy coming up. They got to come up soon now. Yeah, here we go. Nice slow motion intro here. And now we kind of move along as they chase us through the water. This scene especially is great. This is the specific one that I had in mind, because you can see we're moving slowly. They're behind us. We can see that they're behind us. And so this is where the intensity is going to be at its peak. So, again, kind of out of order, but as I was looking at it, I was like, oh, I remember. That's a great example. So, anyways, trippy stuff and illusions. This is the next one here. Features like this are rare. There are not a lot of games that are this experimental that they get into areas like this, but there were a couple examples of like optical illusions and things like that. And so basically, as long as the optical illusions and this trippiness is not so obscure that it's kind of reaching into that, obscure art style territory that we talked about previously, it seems to be interesting to people. I was initially thinking, when I was watching through some of those videos, I was like, this might not be great for retention. People might see this and be a little bit turned off by it, like, oh, this is kind of weird. I don't know what's going on. But it seems to be fine, and even cause, slight bumps. Again, we're talking like 1 to 3%. We'll pull up a couple examples. Okay, Superliminal had a couple decent examples. So there's a 3% bump at B point. Oh, let me scroll down a little bit right here. And we'll just take a look at this here. I think this might be one of the first times that we're using the scaling illusion. I think that might be what this one is. So you can see it's kind of trippy. This is a very trippy game in general, and there might be a couple other examples from it, but this was a slight bump. Or actually, it might have been specifically, let's see, at 318. So this was logged specifically for 308. I guess it's kind of both. There's a couple things going on at once. We've also got this pawn here that looks 3D at first, but it's actually stretched across the floor. So, and then there was another example here at C point, a slight 2% bump / hold, where we've got a cool level transition. Hey, that's pretty smooth right there. That's pretty smooth. That's cool. That's cool. People seem to they liked it. Oh, that's neat. And then there's a couple other examples of maybe slight bumps. E point here, you can see slight little peak there. This is another cool optical illusion as we're going through this hallway here. Kind of neat. So that's about it there. Nothing major, but those sort of visuals, as long as they're still readable, people are okay with that. Okay, so next up, we've got nuanced features and some other notes. So the first thing is action scenes. Now, action scenes had me confused. They had me pacing around my room for probably, I don't know how long it was. It was either hours or maybe a whole day, a couple days. I don't remember. But it had me a little bit stumped. I was looking at all these different things, like chase scenes. And I thought that chase scenes, initially, I thought that they were working well because it's action. Because it's action. There's stuff going on. There's cool things. You're being chased. I thought that was action. And I thought that that's why I was holding retention really well. So I started looking at these games, like shooter games. Games that had lots of combat, things like that. Waves of enemies. And I figured that those would have really good retention. I think that's what most people would expect. But unfortunately, this is not the case. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a clear distinction between kind of where the separating, dividing line is between a chase scene and an action scene. Okay? A chase scene is when the enemy is in control of the situation. Okay? A chase scene is when the enemy is in control. A chase scene is when the player is in danger. Okay? An action scene is when the enemies are in danger. It's when the player is in control of the situation, right? When you're mowing down waves and waves of hundreds of enemies, or however many, 20 enemies, 10 enemies, you are in control of the situation. There's really no threat. There's no threat at all. And so, boss fights, a boss fight is falling into the same kind of category as like these chase scenes where the enemy characters are in control of the situation. But these action scenes that you're seeing in most shooter games are awful for retention because there's no question. There's no conflict. There's no real conflict behind the scenes, right? Because people see like, oh, okay, the player can just mow down enemies. They're just an absolute beast, and there's nothing, there's no unanswered question here. Like, we know how this is going to end. The dividing line is who's exerting more power and control, and who is in the most danger. So furthermore, when I'm talking about action scenes for this point, I'm very specifically talking about anything that's heavily combat focused, right? That's kind of the main thing, is from a combat perspective. Player mowing down lots of enemies. Again, like we were talking about, things like boss fights and slower, more strategic combat segments are different. Action scenes can cause slight 2 to 6% bumps early on, and they can maybe hold it for 10 to 45 seconds. Okay, so at first it looks good, but then after this initial bump and slight hold, the action starts becoming repetitive, exhausting, and people start leaving very, very, very quickly. There's essentially no clear number as to how large this dip will be. Basically, as long as the action continues, retention will continue to drop until it hits 0. It's pretty horrific, and we'll take a look at the charts in a second here. But this can happen in anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes of action, that it'll take for it to like really like bottom out. And that'll kind of depend on how interesting the gameplay is or how unique the action scene is. Keeping people engaged through action scenes is very, very, very difficult. So games that are purely action, like you jump into an arena and you just gun down some enemies and then you move to the next arena, or level-based stuff like that, it's going to be very, very, very difficult. Probably, I would say, the most difficult genre to make go viral. Okay, shooter games. And again, I know some people are thinking of examples in their head, but we're going to go over those in a second. Basically, shooter games should be avoided. If you want to go viral, shooter and action is about the worst place that you could be. Ideally, your action scenes will be shorter. They're going to be more spread apart. giving them more weight and importance, okay? So high action shooters like Doom, they don't actually get that many views. Like, yes, Doom has done perfectly fine. I'm like Doom 2016 and whatever the more recent one is. They've got great word of mouth. People are familiar with them. They've got it's a very long-standing IP. It's got a dedicated fan base. So there are reasons why it is still successful. But from a retention perspective and from a YouTube virality perspective, those games don't really get that many views. Or I guess I maybe shouldn't say that they don't get that many views. Here's the deal. Choo Choo Charles gets as many views on YouTube as Doom 2016. We'll put it that way, right? You know, I'm looking at view counts here. You've got like 7.6 million here, 7.3 million, 7.2 million, 6.5. Obviously, those are big numbers. Those are good. And I think a lot of that is going to be coming from the IP being known. People are engaged in this. And obviously, like as far as high action games go, this is about the best that there is. But you, with your absolutely unknown indie game that nobody knows about, you're going to have a hard time making action work. And again, it's like, even with Choo Choo Charles, I'm actually pulling bigger numbers. Choo Choo Charles videos, you know, focusing more on chase sequences, more weighted. See, oh, hey, 8-Bit Ryan. First we had Choo Choo Charles, now we got this dude. I'll have to watch that. All right, anyways, view count. You know, I love how that's the first thing that pops up. What is this? Yeah, we've got gameplay videos here with 48 million views, 34 million views, 33 million views. We've got, I know there's a couple other with like 15, 20. Right, so high action, that's a tough one. It's a really tough one. So, more strategic and slightly slower shooters, as well as multiplayer shooters, are a little bit better. So something like PUBG, where all the other players are real people, right? You know that they're real people, so you know that it's not going to be an easy time necessarily killing the other players. So you know that there's more threat, as well as that there's more time for tension to build, right? So like, let's say you're running from like one little town settlement to the next town settlement, and you hear gunshots in the distance, and you're like, okay, we're alert now, right? And so now intensity can start to build, and you start kind of creeping in, and you start kind of stalking, and then you can see them in the distance, and then you start to get into a firefight, and they start shooting at you, and you start shooting at them, and you don't know where they are, and right, so there's more intensity, there's more weight. You don't necessarily know how it's going to end, and so because of that, a lot of battle royale games get really, really good retention and are inherently more viral, because it's not just mowing down enemies. Now, there are some scenarios where you do have specific players, like esports players and things like that, who are insanely good at the game. And watching a gameplay video of them, you are watching them mow people down, and a lot of those do get a lot of views. So I think there is probably a slightly different dynamic when you know that it's sort of like watching a speed run, right? It's like, yeah, the person is doing it easily. I mean, they're making it look easy, but you know that what they're doing is difficult and takes a lot of skill. And so for that reason, it can still be engaging in those scenarios. But single player, arena shooter, first FPS games, it's not good. Not good. Basically, the only way to retain viewers through action scenes is ideally to keep them short, or to communicate a clear goal for the players to work towards during combat. Let's take a look at some examples here. First example I've got here is from Conscript. Very sharp fall off. I don't know exactly what that was coming from. But basically it looks like, and I call this repetitive action exhaustion. It looks like it starts kicking in around a minute or a minute and 30 seconds of action. We can kind of take a look here and see if we can find some specific examples. I didn't really log a lot off of this. Long cutscene, expo dumping. This is probably where that initial sharp spike came from. Okay, so I'm going to assume that this is the sharp dip here, and then probably right around here, this is when we actually get in game, and then it's kind of probably going down a little bit until action starts. It's going to bump up a little bit. It's going to hold for a little while. So we're going to have a little bit of time walking around. People are skipping ahead. And then we're going to start to see some action. Right here? Yes. Now we start to see some action. Now people are a little bit more engaged. But as we continue forward, we see, well, how at risk are we really? Because we keep mowing them down, and we're kind of doing okay here. And so then sometime around here, it seems like sometime around the 5-minute mark, which is around here, people start becoming unengaged and they start leaving. Okay, and we can see that it starts to dip, and it keeps dipping and dipping and dipping and dipping and dipping. In this example, the note that I had here is that people seem to be fast forwarding to the action segments, and then after they're seeing how repetitive it is, they seem to be leaving. The big thing hurting retention on this game is the delay in title screen. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not really relevant here. But we can see that there are initially... So I think it's sort of a kind of, I guess you could say, level or round-based game. Pretty short. Keep in mind, this is 2 minutes, where you fight different opponents. You fight an opponent, you kill them, and then you move on to the next opponent. But there's also these level transitions here. So what it seemed like is going on is people fast forward in here. They watch a little bit of combat. It dips as the transition screen comes up, so people go to the next action sequence, and then it kind of goes down again. You know, we can see I've logged here every single one of the dips. Every time that it dips is during menu navigation or during loading screens. And then you can see as we're getting further on through the video, those bumps are getting smaller and smaller, and it's just people leaving and slowly dropping off. All right, this is the other one that we were talking about earlier, where the art style seems a bit obscure combined with high action, and it's resulting in some really, really, really big dips, pulling it down to only a couple of % of people actually watching at the end. We'll pull it up again for an example here. What we see is basically as soon as the action starts, which is almost a little bit odd. It's almost a little bit odd because, and I made a note of this here, that it's kind of strange because there's a little hold, this B hold here for like 25 seconds, where as the player is just walking around, if we're going to go back and just check this out. As we're just walking around, the retention is actually better than when the action starts. And then it's like pretty much right after this, people are like, okay, we get it. And it just kind of continues like this on repeat for a while. And it's just not engaging. All right, this is another example. We looked at some other examples from this game. It's a very similar looking chart where you got a little bit of some expo dumps early on, a little bit of slow stuff, and then you got like some bumps here and there as we're getting through and starting some gameplay and action. Slight hold as the action starts, and then it just kind of starts dropping off pretty quick. You know, it starts off a little bit slow with a bit of a, tutorial and expo dump. A little bit of platforming. And then the action starts somewhere around here. This looks like the start of an arena. You can see we start shooting some enemies. And this is mildly engaging, we can see, for a little bit. This is D, 124. Yeah, where the gameplay started. Yeah, and it holds people for a little while. And it's like, it's cool. This would probably be really fun to play, but from a viewing perspective, you know, like at this point in the video, a lot of people have dropped off. Even though it's the same thing. It's the same stuff, but it gets repetitive. We get the idea, and it becomes unengaging. So I want to find an example now of an area that is holding action, that's holding retention a bit better. Yeah, so in the game Meat Grinder, this one, and I actually played this game. This game was really fun. Again, fun to play. And actually, I mean, the retention here is not awful, but you can kind of see these action dips here. So in any case, there's a specific level that held attention really well. Or there actually might have been a couple, because there's also like some bosses in it, which help with retention, as we've discussed. Yeah, this was an example that I really liked. There's a couple others that are more boss fight oriented, but this one right here, this is the eye hold right here, rock solid for about a minute. A big old cargo plane flies in overhead, and it becomes clear that our goal is to get on top of this plane, or to board the plane. And so what that does, again, this is kind of like what we talked about when it comes to environment design with walking simulators, where if there is a goal in front of you that you are walking towards, it acts like a progress bar. It acts like a loading bar. It's like we know where we're going, and we can see exactly how close we are to it. So, clear definition of goals. This is a creative example of that. And even for a high action shooter, also could be considered that there's a little bit of parkour kind of going on in this as we're jumping across the trucks. So that could be helping it as well. But I just thought that this was a cool example of a really solid hold in an action context. Those are the examples I'll give for action scenes. I wanted to do a few more examples than I normally would, because action scenes, man, it's a tough one to kind of wrap your head around at first. It can be a little bit confusing. Next thing, cutscenes. Cutscenes are, again, one of these nuanced features, because there's nothing inherently wrong with them. They're in a complete gray area. They're neither good or bad. The outcome completely just depends on how the cutscene is being used. If it's an intro cutscene at the start of your game, you just say, as in the same way that you would with gameplay, you just want to get to the point fast, give people a goal or a conflict. If you start with 10 seconds of random environment shots, people are going to skip it, or they're going to leave the video. And there are examples of that where there's like 15% dips. But if you've got an intro cutscene that clearly defines a goal, then that can hold attention really well, and that can be a good way to introduce the goal for gameplay. Cutscenes that interrupt the flow of the game, or that make really abrupt pacing shifts, seem to be a little bit dangerous, right? And then you can see, like, I've seen 6 to 20% dips. Like, let's say and we kind of talked about this in the chase section, but if you've got like a really intense chase sequence, and then somebody goes through a door, and then a cutscene plays, and now the tone is shifted, and everybody's completely safe, and the threat is gone, and you've just got this massive cut in tension, then you're probably going to see a lot of people leave. So basically, cutscenes should follow the same principles as gameplay. You should be outlining clearly defined goals. You should be avoiding dull stuff. Next up is mystery and tension. Now, this one it can feel a little bit counterintuitive when we've also talked about, like notes and expo dumps. But I think there are ways to do this intelligently. So basically, coaxing people with a mysterious story can be another effective way to hold people's attention, although it is risky since it's typically done through dialogue and expo dumps. And I wrote here, very epically, because since we're smart, epic people, there's a way around this. Just make stuff mysterious without long expo dumps. Wow, very surprising answer and very crazy. And I even put this little face in here. because I can. Anyways, you can seed mysterious ideas and ominous intentions over the course of a few minutes with, small environmental cues or very brief conversations that follow the best practices outlined in point E for expo dumps. Mysterious characters and lore can be a nice way to add additional layers of conflict, but it's probably not going to get great holds on its own. Ideally, you'd want to combine this with other forms of conflict. So, yeah, it's one of those ones that you have to approach very, very carefully and slowly and cautiously. I think, again, if you've got like a story-based game, a puzzle game, something like that, it's something that you can do and probably should, but you have to be careful not to get into this territory where, you're doing these big expo dumps or putting notes 30 seconds into your game that are 2 paragraphs long, right? That's too heavy-handed, and that's going to work against you. Subtle cues. I think one good example was this one about dinner with an owl. Yeah, this one here. So it had some decent holds upon being introduced to this interesting, odd, kind of ominous character of this owl guy. And actually, let me go specifically to like one of these parts where we're introduced to him. And you can see also, like, this is why it's kind of difficult, right? It's because it's like, if you've got one of these kind of slow burn games, it could be tough because it's like, how long is it going to take you to get to the point where you can show something ominous, right? It's like, you got to do it as soon as possible. But that can be difficult.
Very well. Guys,
that's Mr. Owl.
Going on here?
Yeah, he's literally saying it himself. He's accentuating the conflict. What is going on here? There's something odd. Something strange is afoot. Yes, very true. Great observation. And then the last thing is kind of subtitles. Again, this is kind of one of these things that, or subtitles and voice acting. Not really much in the way of specific stats here, but something that I wanted to mention, kind of in the same vein as notes and expo dumps. Basically, when it comes to subtitles, notes, and any other important on-screen text, and I guess I already kind of mentioned this, but make sure that the text font size is large enough that people can read it. Ideally, don't use any like super stylish, creative, wacky fonts. It should just be readable, right? People should just be able to read it, ideally, even if they're like watching on their phone. That this doesn't necessarily apply to like press E to interact. It's like, okay, the person watching on their phone doesn't need to know that press E to interact is on screen. That can be small. You can do whatever with that. But if it's information that a person watching should be able to follow along with, then it should be readable, right? So, as well as that, I think in most scenarios, anytime where it could make sense to have voice acting, I think you should have voice acting, because again, I think it makes stuff easier to digest. But again, it's like it would definitely be better in a no commentary context. But in a commentated context, there's also a good argument to say that it would be better to not do voice acting, because then the YouTubers can do their own voice. They could do a goofy voice and make it more entertaining, or they could read it faster, right? Maybe your voice acting is like kind of slow and methodical, and it's like maybe it's it might be really, really good, but it might be too slow for their specific YouTube audience, and they're going to know their audience better than you do, so they might be able to cater their voice acting, right? That their voiceover that they're doing better to their audience. So, it's just, again, that's why it's in the nuanced features section, because it's one of these things where it's like you got to kind of weigh both sides and just see what makes the most sense. So, wow, big video. That's probably going to be the biggest video on this channel, probably one of the most valuable videos on this channel. Obviously, I'll have plenty more, but this is definitely a big one. So, a couple other notes kind of on this topic. So, there's kind of a spectrum here when it comes to virality and the level of formatting that you're putting into your game. a game like Choo Choo Charles happens to be really, really well formatted for long form content, for content on YouTube, decently well formatted for live streams, but very, very good for long form as well as for short form, right? Because you can just take a 20-second clip of being chased by Charles and go viral on TikTok with, 10 million views. I mean, not anymore, but you used to be able to, right? And so that's how it got out there. And that's because it was super specific in its formatting, right? It's super, super specifically like, okay, you're being chased, large enemy, very imposing, right? All of the stuff that we've talked about. But the problem is that while it is very predictably viral, it is limited in how far it can go and how long the lifespan of that game would be. Because how many viral videos can you make out of this game? It's like ultimately not many, right? It's like most YouTubers that are covering or that did cover Choo Choo Charles, they'd make like one, maybe two videos. Maybe they do it in like a 2 or 3 part series. Maybe if they're really stretching it, they'll do like a couple of mod videos where they'll mod the game, or maybe they would do a story explained video, right? If you're like really stretching it thin. But it's like ultimately, even if the content is still getting great view counts and great retention, it's like you run out of content really quick. You hit this roadblock where, because it's like, even though it's formatted really well, there's only so much of it there for people to make content out of. So this is where you start balancing longevity and specificity. So if you wanted a game to go more viral, you have to be less specific with your formatting in a more open-ended way that's essentially leaning closer to like a sandbox game. So like with Cuff Bust, what I'm trying to do is format it in such a way that people can come up with kind of some of their own goals, some of their own challenges, their own play styles, so that they can create more content out of it. Even if, like the game by default, like here's the deal, right? With Choo Choo Charles, any random person could upload a video of being chased by Charles, and it's perfectly formatted to go viral, right? You could have 100 followers and still go viral because the game itself is it's formatted that way. With Cuff Bust, it's not going to be as easy for just anybody to go viral. It takes a more skilled YouTuber who understands their audience and understands retention and the algorithms and all this stuff to use the game as a tool creatively to make good content. But if they can do that, then they could potentially make 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 videos out of it, right? So you're teetering, it's this balance. So you have to weigh kind of the level of precision that you want based on how much longevity you want. I think trying to make a game that has more longevity requires more precision and is probably a little bit more difficult. Having a game that's more specifically formatted, though, you can better ensure that you're going to go viral, but you're not going to have quite as much longevity, most likely. That's kind of the main stuff. That's kind of the main stuff to keep in mind here. I don't know. I'll just link whatever I think is relevant, I guess, and you can take a look at it more there. I'll probably link some of the documents that I've been showing throughout here. So there you have it. That's your movie for the day.